Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is an interview with Christopher Miller of Scribe Games, and he currently has a Kickstarter out for Ankur, Kingdom of the Gods. It's technically it's either a revised edition of his original Ankur. Kingdom of the Gods, it's described on the Kickstarter as a second edition. It has a lot of additional content included in it, and of course some errata and other details, fixes that he made from the first edition to the second edition. Without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the interview. The interview, lasts for roughly an hour, and then I will come back on and do a little wrap up and show you where the Kickstarter currently is now. It is, as of now, fully funded, although I did this interview with him on Sunday, so really 2 days ago, and I'm glad to see that in the interim time he had crossed over that threshold and has another successfully backed Kickstarter. So once again, I will move on to the next stage of this video. Turned on, and we are good. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another interview on Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Chris from Scribe Games, who currently has a Kickstarter out that we're going to talk about a little bit as well, and then I will kind of package this whole interview up within my usual presentation, and I will have the links for his Kickstarter and any other projects that Chris has out there for you to take a look at. But before we get into it, I'll just allow Chris to introduce himself, and then we'll get to a couple questions, and then I'm going to let him just run with explaining his most recent project.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Chris Miller. I'm an independent game designer here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been working on my own RPG product for about 10 years now. It's called Ankur, Kingdom of the Gods. It really came about initially as just kind of a homebrew setting, for D&D, and I was going through a real kind of shaky period some years back with my job, and had kind of a midlife crisis, and I was trying to decide what to do with my life, and for some reason I thought making a game would be a good idea. So, I quit my job and went all in and created this game that, like I said, over the years I took it to lots of different conventions and did a lot of demos and play testing and whatnot, and finally, Kickstarter was a thing, about 7 years ago. And so I ran a Kickstarter campaign, and it was successful. And, so then I came out with a couple of supplements and did a Kickstarter for one of those, and that worked out well. And now, essentially, after years of gameplay and rules errata and things like that, I was never really happy with the first version of the game, the core rules book, and I made a lot of revisions to it this last year. God knows I had the time, right? And I added something like 150 pages to the book. Well, it became so unwieldy, and so expensive to print, that I just decided to kind of make the decision to cut the book in half. I separated it into a player's guide and a GM's guide, added a whole lot, I think something like 100 new pieces of artwork, although most of those are small. and kind of reworked. I addressed all the rules errata, problems that I had, and all the spelling errors and things that I had missed in my early days of editing. And I'm trying right now to run a new Kickstarter to put out a better product. This is the book that I wanted to make in the first place. At the time, I was, we'll say I was young and stupid and didn't know everything, about the business that I do now. So we'll cross our fingers and hopefully it'll do well and fund. And I've got a lot more projects in the future too that I want to work on in conjunction with this game. A lot of new, setting expansions and that sort of thing.
Oh, that sounds really great. And it's interesting to hear about, how you came out with, this first version, and I mean, anytime that you're producing something and then years down the road, especially after you've been, play testing it and playing it at various conventions and everything, and then tweaking it, and I guess there is at some point like a threshold where it's like I'm just going to repackage this and call it revised or second edition or whatever, but
I kind of racked my brain over whether to officially call it a second edition or not, and I'm not sure what constitutes a second edition. I was told that in order to really call it that, you had to have a more broad sweeping kind of change in the rules. Mm-hmm. And other than, to be honest, I mean, I don't know that has happened. There's probably 15 or 20 minor issues that things that I tweaked, things didn't work out well. There's a point buy system in the game, and some of the points were off in places, and so to balance things a little better, I decided to change some things. But I don't know if it's a second edition. That's why.
It sounds more like a revised then, yeah. So it sounds more like a,
Exactly. It says revised, second and all that. Yeah. So I am, however, as part of the Kickstarter, we're going to do a stretch goal with getting an artist to do a new cover. Mm-hmm. Not that the original cover's bad, but there were some people who had played that kind of voiced an interest in having, since it's a new book and it's been revamped, possibly doing a new cover. So I've contracted Den Bouvace to do a new cover, assuming we meet the goal. And what I'll probably do is offer printings with both covers.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
That, if you want to keep the original, that's fine. If you want to get the new cover or both, I mean.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to the in the can kind of question. So, what was your introduction to tabletop role playing?
Oh wow. So I was, I think, 8 years old. I had a next door neighbor who had a trampoline, and so he was like one of the most popular kids in the neighborhood, right? And me and my brother used to go over there and jump on the trampoline all day, and even back then, before we knew anything about D&D, we would take broomsticks and trash can lids and and have mock battle. We'd pretend to be knights or something and do. And so it was kind of right up our alley. But I went over there one day and he had all these little lead miniatures, and it was actually the Grenadier box set that had all the halflings in it.
Okay.
At the time, I'd just never seen anything like that. It was really cool looking, and so I traded some G.I. Joes for some of the miniatures, and I asked him where he'd bought these, and it was a local gaming store not too far down the road, So I convinced my mother to take me down there, and we immediately bought some more miniatures and the first edition book, and they had a gaming group in the back that would play in the storeroom. Mm-hmm. This was Titans Games and Comics back in the early 80s, right? So, I ended up going over there every Saturday for most of my life, my childhood anyway. And my parents thought it was great because they didn't need a babysitter,
Right.
They'd drop me off at like 8 in the morning and pick me up at 8 at night, and we would play Dungeons and Dragons all day.
Right.
And man, there was quite an eccentric group of characters. We had some of the weirdest folks back there. Matter of fact, there was a guy named Weird Bob. Weird Bob worked for the Air Force, and I don't know if it was true or not, but he used to tell everyone that he was one of the guys that was responsible for turning the key to launch the nuclear missiles if that were ever to happen. Huh. And so he was always really stressed out and disheveled hair and wild eyes, and he drank way too much coffee. We had Steve, who had a speech impediment, sounded like Sylvester the cat, but he was a champion bodybuilder from the 70s that was retired at that. And he had these really thick, big rim glasses, and he always wore a weightlifter's belt in sweats, no matter where he went. We had Dale, who was a hippie and a Satan worshiper. So that made my mom very happy. We had Shannon was a little person. Who, of course, was fine to call him a midget at the time. Yeah. Shannon always carried a katana with him wherever he went. Imagine this little 3-foot tall guy with a katana, but we just had this great group of people. Right. A lot of it was a very diverse crowd, and we played games every Saturday, and then eventually Titans, the owner of Titans Games and Comics, created Dragon Con, and I ended up working for Dragon Con for 10 years.
Oh, okay.
I was one of the guest liaisons for the Walk of Fame, so all the movie stars that came in town.
Wow.
I had to pick them up from the airport, check them into their hotels, take them out to eat, entertain them. So I got to meet lots and lots of movie stars and have a lot of stories with that. But, I was in that gaming scene all through the 80s and 90s, and I got into LARPing and did that for a good while. And, and here I am today. So, that's what kind of influenced me at the time. We played everything under the sun back then. It wasn't D&D. We played Traveler, we'd play Star Trek and Palladium games and all kinds of things. And so I drew on a lot of that and those experiences to kind of make up my own system. So
yeah, I know. Looking at the game, I can see that it's kind of a combination of sci-fi fantasy. And the setting is kind of like, would it be fair to say the setting is like somewhat historical? So I know it's set in Sumeria, right? Or it's a Sumerian theme. So
it's based primarily on Sumerian mythology. And I have to throw, obviously the Ancient Aliens theme is in there.
Yes.
But that goes hand in hand with the Sumerian theme because the Sumerians believed that their gods came from another planet. Right. And that they were aliens and had spaceships and this and that and the other. I say mainly Sumerian, but when you dive down that rabbit hole and you read enough about Sumerian mythos, it really ties in with Egyptian stuff. It ties in with the Norse religion, ties in with Hinduism. And to be realistic, if you go back, historically, the people of that region, we're talking, the ancient land of Arata, the Caucasus Mountains, and that region. The group of people that came out of that spot moved around and became, the ones who traveled north became the Norse. The ones who went east became the Hindus.
Right.
The ones who traveled south, became the Egyptians. And so their languages, if you go back to the earliest versions of their languages, and I know that historians will say now that, Sumerian is a dead language and there was no link between that and any other language. That's just not true. I mean, you can look at ancient Chinese, you can look at Mesoamerican languages, you can look at the Norse language, and there are dozens of words that, like the word for water and food and mother and father and, things like that, the earth and sky, are virtually the same all over the world. And so kind of goes with both the biblical and the Sumerian story about everyone in the world speaking the same language prior to the Tower of Babel. So I really tried to touch on as much of that as I could, and put it in the context of the game in a believable way. The whole premise of all this is really, I was so astounded by all these different mythologies that I'd read into, and I just said, well, what if any of that was true? So I'm taking these ancient religions and these ancient mythologies at face value. Right. So, I know some people have, kind of wrongly accused me of appropriating some other culture or something like that. I one of the setting supplements I put out last year, had a successful Kickstarter for that one, was on ancient Africa. Mm-hmm. And then I researched that for 2 solid years. And I'm not making stuff up. I'm simply taking what African people believe and saying that it was true. But now I'm getting people saying that it shouldn't have been written by a white guy or something like that.
Well, it's there was a time when you were inspired by something, regardless of the culture that it came from, that there was you're showing an appreciation for a different culture. It's like we are such an integrated planet that it's virtually impossible at this point to say, well, I can appreciate that, but if I do it, I'm going to be ridiculed for appreciating another. That used to be something that we teach foreign languages in schools. For the reason of you want people. That's not called appropriation. That's called being able to reach out and have a more diverse interaction with the rest of the world. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And
a lot of these people that are so critical of it and never read the book.
Right. So, well, yeah, that's the other thing. There's many people out there that are hobby adjacent. In other words, they don't actually buy anything. They just like to be attached to the hobby in some way. I'm part of that community, or that fam, which drives me insane. When I see TTRPG fam, it's like, no, we're not family. We're not a community. It's a hobby. And, no one can be kicked out of the hobby. Nobody needs a special invite into the hobby. The hobby is open for everybody to participate in it in virtually any way that they choose. So, it's... And
that's that you can get a whole side on that, because, that's the way that Gary Gygax envisioned D&D in the first place. Whenever he got addressed with questions or rules questions, he would just say, "Well, how would you have done it?" Let your DM decide. Make up whatever rule fits your group on the fly, and just he was all about house rules. I think to a large extent, 5th edition in particular is is very much against that kind of a thing, and they tend to, kind of pigeonhole you into, well, this is what your character can do. This is everything's written in stone.
Yeah.
GMs are not allowed to change anything without the consent of the players, or something. It just goes down a different path. And I mean,
Yeah,
and it's fine too. If you want to play it that way, you can do that. I tried with my game, to make it as accessible to people as possible. That it's very modular. I have, particularly in the combat section, there are a lot of maneuvers and a lot of, rules and things that you can use to play the game as though it were more like an old style D&D game, or maybe a war game, where you're really thinking about, okay, well, how many hexes on the map can I move, and what's my facing, and do I have this firing arc, to hit this person, or you could also negate a lot of that and just do more of a theater of the mind, and just kind of describe everything too. I give people a lot of options in the game, and I think the game itself is I consider it rules light, even though it's like 330 pages long.
Right.
But, the reason I can say that, though, is there's really just one or two mechanics that kind of are used throughout the whole game for almost any scenario. And I've had people tell me that once they get around using, because I use a D12 for the game, so it's a little strange for people who.
Yeah, I was going to get to that, actually. I was going to ask about that, that specific mechanic. So, what is the D12, and how does that really impact the way the game was developed?
So, all right. So initially, I wanted to make it a D20 system, and we're going back to 2003, 2005, that time. I was, because like I said, these were house rules and kind of my homebrew for a D&D setting. And so I was using D20, but there was so much that I didn't like about D20 that I likened it to kind of a game of Jenga, As I started taking things out that I didn't like, the whole thing became precarious. So I decided I was either going to have to go, full in with D20 and just kind of, my dislikes be damned, or I was going to have to make a new system.
Right.
I really didn't want to make a new system because it seemed like a big headache, and hence it was. Yeah. But at the time, the D20 system had just come up for open license.
Right.
And so I was thinking that I could just kind of reprint stuff out of the D&D books, and it would be a lot of work, and I could sell something based on that. I had a very good friend of mine. His name was Mike Yao, and he had just developed his own game that was based on the D20 system. And despite the open license, he got a cease and desist. And Hasbro, when Hasbro bought WotC, they were kind of, renegotiating those deals, and so they, for a period of time there, they weren't honoring every aspect of the D20's open license agreement. So that kind of pushed me to say, well, I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not a super litigious person. I don't want to have to deal with anything.
With that,
so I'm going to. So I was looking for different dice to use. I said, well, if I'm not going to do their system, I might as well just choose a whole different die. And initially, I started looking at percentile or a D6, 2D6, something like that. I just wasn't happy with the way that any of that was kind of working, and then I actually started reading some more on Sumerian numerology.
Mm-hmm.
And it come to find out, the number 12 is sacred. Yeah, it's sacred.
Yeah.
And so once I read that, I was like, well, how can I not?
Yeah, exactly. How could you not?
And I said, well, this is not going to work if I keep the standard stat block of 1 through 18 or 1 through 20 like Dungeons and Dragons does, because obviously on a D12, if I'm looking to do difficulty numbers or something like that, it's just not going to work out. And then it kind of hit me. I said, well, in games like D&D, yes, you can have a stat range of between 1 and 18, but there's only ever 5 numbers that give you any kind of a bonus anyway.
Right.
Anything less than like a 14 or depending on what edition you play, maybe.
Right.
Anything less than like a 14 is average. Is or a penalty. And so I said, what's the point of having such a broad range of nothingness, and then just a few numbers that make a difference?
Right.
So I decided to make my stat range between 1 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that works with a D12, and in addition to that, I decided not to use class levels, but instead to go with a skill-based system and do skill level. And the basic mechanic for my game actually involves both of those. It's called an APN, or an action potential number. And what I decided to do was you add your skill and you add the corresponding stat together, and that's your APN. That's your target number. You want to roll that number or less on a D12 to succeed.
Okay.
A 12 is always a failure. It's always a critical failure, in fact. A 1 is good.
Yeah.
So you can roll low. A 1 is considered an automatic success, but never a critical success.
Okay.
And so it's a roll, what they would call now as a roll under system. I'm not 100% sure, but I think at the time when I came up with this, I was the only system using roll under. I may be mistaken, but I did another interview with somebody some years back, and they told me I was the only D12 system and the only roll under system at the time. So, if anybody in comment section wants to point something else out, I don't know. But it certainly wasn't a common mechanic back then.
Right.
Then I said, well, I had gotten some criticism from people saying, well, what if you get a lot of bonuses or minuses to something, and it would put your APN higher than 11.
Right.
And so the way that works is there's not really going to be a chance to get that many bonuses in the game, by the way. It's just not, unlike Dungeons and Dragons, there's not a need for that. But there are a few occasions where it can happen. So what I decided to do was just have you count, your APN up to 11. And remember, it can never be higher than 11 because 12 is always a critical failure. Right. And then any number higher than 11, you count backwards, and that just increases the crit range.
I see.
So, and that makes sense too, because obviously the better you are at something, the better you should be at doing that critically well.
Right, yeah.
It also works the opposite way. So if you've got a huge penalty to something, a 1 is always a success, so you can't go below 1. So then you start counting back the other way, and that increases the critical failure range.
Right.
So you could essentially have, if you got a really big penalty to something, you could have a 2 through 12 be a critical failure, but 1 would always be a success.
Right.
But never a critical success.
Right.
And so that's the basic mechanic for the for the whole game. Anytime you would attack someone or attempt a skill or when you try saves, excuse me, it's all this. It's just uses the same mechanic, and you just need one D12 for the entire system. Even when you attack, that same roll determines not only whether you succeeded based on your APN, but you then compare that number versus the person's passive armor defense, which I call it a PDR, right? And essentially, what I've decided to do was to kind of create my own armor class. Was you have 11 different locations on your body where you can wear armor, and these were, I looked at ancient armor types and ancient clothing and everything from gladiatorial stuff to like Romans and Egyptians and ancient Sumerians. And how did they really wear armor? They didn't have plate mail that covered every inch of your body back then. It was typically you would have, a set of bracers, a set of greaves, maybe a thick girdle. You might have some people with helmets or, the Sumerians used these capes that had armored plates on them and stuff. But typically they wouldn't cover their entire body, so there'd be a lot of open areas.
Right.
Like what you do is you take each location that you have armor, and for each location that's armored, you add 1 point to your PDR, to your passive defense rating. So the maximum you can have is 11.
Right.
And when you roll to hit, you just need to you say, okay, well, is my roll to hit higher or lower than their PDR? If it's higher, then you manage to bypass the armor and get in a chink in the armor or an unarmored spot. If it's below the PDR, then you've hit the armor. You still do damage, but now they get armor reduction off the damage.
Right.
So I thought that was fairly ingenious.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing because I've seen that mechanic before. As far as armor not being, well, you missed, you still hit. Right. It's just that now the armor is going to either mitigate a certain amount of the damage, or you could take no damage at all. It depends on the quality of the hit, but then does armor take damage itself? Does it degrade?
It does not when you're wearing it. Right. And I had to come to some decisions that weren't necessarily as realistic as possible. Okay. But there was no good way to handle that. So when the armor is being worn, it doesn't take damage. Right. Now, if I take the armor off and I set it next to a tree, and a dragon comes over and breathes fire on it, right? Yeah. Then well, now we're going to get into the toughness system, sort of. Right. Okay, so everything in the world in my game has a toughness number. People have a toughness number. It's actually a stat. But all inanimate objects have a toughness as well. So, for example, if I'm using a copper sword and I'm striking a wooden staff, the copper has a higher toughness number than the staff, and so essentially you subtract the lower number from the higher number. Whatever's left over is damage to the lower toughness weapon. Right. So the same thing works with armor. If I'm attacking this suit of armor sitting on the ground with a spear, I would just subtract the armor's toughness number from the weapon's toughness. Whatever was left over is damage to the armor. Right. And then you can repair it, obviously, if you have blacksmith tools and that sort of a thing. But, I thought that was a little interesting. It can get a little clunky at times, and I'm worried about that. But so far, I run my own campaign, and it's not really been an issue. I think it works having kind of a universal rule works well when players are, say, in a dungeon and they want to, okay, I want to take my axe and cut down this door. How long is that going to take? Well, the door has X number of, toughness points, and your weapon has a toughness number. And so, we keep doing damage each round until there's no more toughness for the door, and then it breaks. So, it has a lot of uses in the system, and because it's universal too, I can use it for vehicle damage, and I can everything under the sun, really. But I don't know how far off on a tangent we got there from the original question.
No, that's. I mean, we're basically talking about game mechanics and in a general sense and everything. So I mean, I backed the Kickstarter, and you're actually very close, to hitting your goal, by the way. So you still have 25 days to go, to hit your goal, and you're less than $200 away from hitting your pledge goal. So, you're real close. So when I was looking at it, I see, sci-fi, sci fantasy, I should say. It's modular, rules like unique, D12. So I was interested to hear about that. You have a variety of non-combat roles, gritty, realistic combat, which I, also love, because I like, the grittier the better, really. I'm kind of old school in that.
I don't pull any punches with combat. I use the word. I mean, when I talk in the book, I do mention several times that I tried to make the book, I tried to make the game. What am I looking for? Balanced, right? But to a certain extent, I don't like the whole concept of being completely balanced, because real life is not balanced,
right?
And I think I don't want to harp on D&D so much, but one of the things that I don't like about the newer system is, everything is kind of dumbed down, or a lot of the monsters, and they've got these threat ratings, and everything's kind of. They want you to make sure that the players are never going to have a difficult time fighting whatever they're doing, right? I decided not to do anything like threat ratings or even XP levels or anything like that with the monsters and stuff in my game. The monster is what it is, and it has these abilities, and it can do what it does, and whether you are fight that monster and win or not is kind of irrelevant, right?
Right.
So if you're going to go and kill the Minotaur in the maze, you shouldn't know whether you're going to succeed or not before you get there.
Right.
In a sense, I think it's very balanced with character creation, so that depending on what role you pick, okay, well, this is your profession, this is the race that you want to play, and so on and so forth. I think there are checks and balances for all of those, so that nobody's really that much better or worse than each other, although there are different things that you would be good at, Right. But I don't, when I was making the game, I didn't want to apply that same kind of thing to monsters and weapons and vehicles and different things like that. Your character could get a hold of a ray gun, and the GM may have a hard time with you blasting everything around and disintegrating people. But but that's something that's story driven too, that he's going to have to deal with. There's lots of ways you can mitigate that if you wanted. I guess you could say, well, you find this laser gun, but it's only got X number of charges left. They're illegal for humans to own, and so if you get caught with it, it's the death penalty or whatever.
Right.
So it's not like there's a lot of that going around. without going into a lot of detail, the setting has kind of there are these austerity laws that the aliens have imposed on the human race, and that's because, and we can do this later if you want, but the human race and all of the subhuman races that were created along with it were created by the aliens as I hate to use the word slave race, but they're certainly undocumented workers, if you put it that way. They needed to mine gold, for the aliens, and there are reasons that because they don't survive so well on our planet. All right, so where was I going with the?
You were just talking about, the not need for balance, or they're somewhat balancing, but there's not like a threat level or a critical, not a critical rating. What do they call it? They call it a challenge rating or anything like that. So
so the aliens created the humans, and the austerity laws. Well, so essentially they felt there's certain elements within the alien community and their own government that feel ashamed or feel badly about the mistreatment of the humans, right? Mm-hmm. And our intelligence, our sentience was not exactly a planned thing. They wanted more of a primal automaton kind of a thing, and we ended up having intelligence. And so because they were too much of an indiscretion, they decided to keep us as low tech as possible, so that we don't become any more, I guess, civilized than we are, and therefore cause a problem with because slavery is illegal in their own world, and so as long as they keep us just south of their level of sentience or whatever, they consider okay. So anyway, but because of these austerity laws, the humans are not really supposed to have rocket ships and generators and laser guns and things like that. And some of this does exist in the cities that are by the aliens, but like I said, it's it may exist for the good of the community, but you as a character aren't usually supposed to have that kind of. So that in itself is another kind of check or balance. Correct. With the high technology, so you don't have everybody running around with laser guns. Laser guns, right? Yeah. That sounds really interesting, and it sounds like it's a nice. It allows for a lot of opportunities, so you can have things like, there would be like criminal enterprise where they are getting those things to the humans that aren't supposed to have them, or you could play the other role of, you're an agent of the aliens searching for those, weapons caches and things like that. So there seems to be a lot of room for. There is definitely a thriving black market. There is a lot of politics and intrigue within the game. City adventures in particular, I think, are some of the best ones to at least start with this game, because I've done so much detail and so much work on locations and NPCs and different organizations and guilds and there's a caste system. A caste system in the game that is very kind of integral to society, and so that that goes back. Obviously, I was basing that on Sumerian, Egyptian, and Hindu mythology. They all had caste systems. Yeah, and in places like ancient Egypt, for example, your profession was predetermined at birth, and even your diet if you lived in ancient Egypt, if you were a scribe, for example, you were never allowed to eat meat. So you had to have a certain diet, and you weren't allowed to perform certain types of exercises that would beef you up too much or something like that.
Right.
They really had, I guess, the way that they explained it in a lot of these ancient documents was that if you were going to be in a position in particular where you would meet with the gods on a regular basis, if you were a liaison for the gods, which a lot of the scribes were, that was their whole role. You had to shave your entire body.
Right.
The aliens didn't like body hair. You had to bathe every time before you went to see the gods.
Right.
Because the gods didn't like the way humans smelled. And you weren't allowed to have tattoos, and things like this. And so, and even this, a lot of this is echoed in, biblical tradition too. A lot of people, Christians and Jews today, won't get tattoos, for example, because God said not to, right? Well, so I put some of that in the game too. I was an ancient history major in college and never finished, but I traveled abroad a lot, and I went on archaeological digs, and my parents were missionaries when I was a kid, so I got to travel around and do that. So I lived in South America and Central America and India and some different places, and so my experience getting to see those wonderful pyramids and temples and talk to the people and get their views on their own mythology, and it really had a lot to do with what I put in the book. And of course the Ancient Alien show, when I started on, I got hooked on that too. But like I said, I tried to. There is a fine line between historical fact and then the mythology stuff, but I try to blur that as much as possible so that it adds kind of a credibility to the story being told in the game. I want it to be believable,
and that's something like when you're sometimes they call that like an authenticity to it. It has to have somewhat of an authentic, if it breaks too far to the mythology side, then it becomes less believable, as you're saying. So, it's usually described as just being like a more authentic, approach to it, which is actually, as a historian myself, that's what I am as by trade, as well. Is that it's nice to have something that's like at least somewhat rooted in some research into the theme that you're doing, and so the fact that you actually did that, I think, gives a lot of credibility to the project as well, because then it's like, well, here are explanations why certain things are the way that they are, and you really can't, argue against that when there was a certain amount of research put behind it. So let's move on to, so what is your next big project? Well,
I already announced this last year, and I'm sad that I got so far behind due to COVID and all that stuff, and but the next thing that I would like to do is a supplement that will detail the northern kingdoms of Arata. So the core book, the first book that I did, and to a large extent, I guess, the now what I'm calling the Player's Handbook, That book covers mostly the land of Shinar, which is Iraq, Iran, parts of like Syria and Israel and that area, right? The land between the two rivers, essentially.
Right.
The book that I came out with last year deals with the entire African continent, which was way more than I had thought was going to.
Right.
I kind of envisioned doing, I'll do something with Egypt and maybe the Moreau or something. No, it ended up being an entire continent, and it took me forever. But it's one of my favorite books, though. So the land of Arata is everything north of the mountain region, just north of Shinar. So you're talking like Turkey, Armenia, Soviet Georgia, the Black Sea, and that whole area, which actually is ancient Samaria,
Right.
Not Sumeria, but
Samaria. Yeah.
Conan and the whole area. So I thought, wow, okay, I get to write stuff about Conan essentially here. And then as I was doing my research, I found out that during the timeline of the game, which is 25 to 30,000 years ago, there was an ice wall. There was a glacier just north of Samaria with like an ice sheet that was like 2 miles high. So now I'm thinking like, that's like Game of Thrones a little bit, Okay. So we've got the northern ice wall and these Hyborian barbarians, and then you've got this culture centered around the Black Sea, who worshipped Baphomet. And so I'm thinking, man, this is great. I have a race, actually. It's an alien race, but I have a race in the game that is a humanoid goat hybrid with horns and everything. And so I'm totally going to make my Baphomet be one of those guys, and we'll just so I'm very excited about all that. It's probably going to take me. I think I'm slower than George R. Martin at writing stuff, so probably a year to do that and get it up on Kickstarter. But that's the next project. Okay. I had given some thought to doing my own OSR setting, but to be honest, here lately they've come out with so many OSR games. I'm just kind of I don't know if it would be noticed, and so I don't know that I have anything new to contribute. I really like Dungeon Crawl Classics. I play that occasionally. I've seen and read, although I've not played, White Hack and Black Hack and some different things. So, by the way, those two systems are so similar in some ways to Ankur that part of my original idea was, I'll just kind of take my combat system from Ankur and tweak it a little bit, make it a little more D&D friendly, and I'll use that. Well, I mean, that's essentially what White and Black Hack did.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't, like I said, I don't know if there's anything new I could really contribute. So I think I'll focus on further Ankur products, and we'll see where it goes from there. As long as I can keep funding on Kickstarter, I'll make stuff.
Right.
I've got people that really want me to do a journey to the center of the earth kind of thing.
Well, that would be interesting too. Yeah.
I could do. I've touched on that a little bit in the game. So there is some Hollow Earth element to the game. I also need to, at some point, detail the planet Nibiru, where all the aliens come from.
Right.
I only talk about that briefly in the core book. It's got a couple of paragraphs, and that's about it. So I don't know. I need to. That might be. Those would probably be the two products I come up with after the Lands of Arata. So.
Well, that sounds really cool. Yeah, and probably a really good idea not to produce just like another OSR. At this point, it's nice to see some other systems, being created out there, just to see, just different kind of mechanics, different, and just see how those games work and develop. I mean, as somebody who, as you can see, collects a lot, and I personally, as a consumer, I got to the point like how many more OSR,
Right.
retro clones do I really need? At this point, I probably have about 6 or 7 of them that are still fairly mainstream for OSR games, but the point is, it's I'd rather see a new system. So looking at it like a D12 system now, or if I go back to like Star Wars, under its D6 system, that had a great interest to me because I was like, all right, it's at least a different system that I can take a look at and try to learn a little bit from, and just become a student of the game mechanics rather than just a player of the same game mechanic, tweaked slightly and repeated over and over again. So so that's one of the things that attracted me to your game was the setting and the the game mechanics, the D12 and just the aesthetic of it all is like that's really interesting to me. I'm going to back it. So as a consumer of a lot, I can honestly say I look for different things, and so that's what your game certainly in its Kickstarter kind of provided. I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to go for that. So that's pretty much it from like my end. Is there anything that you want to just close this out with? Any kind of statement about your Kickstarter, or just anything in general?
Well, I wanted to backtrack just a second and talk about I totally agree with what you said about there not being enough different systems out there, and like I said, it was one of the reasons I chose to do my own system, is because I don't like how things progressed after the 1990s, where everything became D20, and whether it's just standard D20 or whether you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and at that time, 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, what have you, 6th edition now. I thought everything just kind of became the same, and I come from a time period when we used to play D6 Star Wars. I still actually I was able to get a couple of games of that last year, and we sat and played that for 3 or 4 sessions, I think. Had a blast. I mean, it's still just as playable as it ever was, and it has such a nostalgic feel to it. I liked having so many options. Like we could get together every weekend back then and play a different system, for years on end, and you never play the same thing twice. I mean,
right.
And today, it's kind of like every time I mention I'm a game designer, well, first of all, I always think it's a video game. But when they find out it's tabletop, they're like, oh, well, so it's D20? And I'm like, well, no, it's this whole new system, and they look so dumbfounded, like They never understood that. Well, D20 is the only thing there is, and it's like, well, no, that's what I'm trying to tell you. There are more than one
other things.
Way to skin a cat, So I'm really appreciative that there are people that, like yourself, want something different to play. And look, I'm not even saying my system's the best system. but it works, for my setting, and it's good at what it does, and I think it's like it's as simple as I could make it. I So anyway, I just hope. I know it's kind of a niche market,
Right.
even on Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at stuff just as I'm checking my page every day.
Right.
But I looked at stuff yesterday, and I was browsing through, and I saw easily 100 RPGs that
Yeah.
are in various stages of funding, and they're all D20,
Yeah.
and it's all either open license D&D stuff or straight up 5e
Yeah.
module, something like that. At some point, I mean, the bottom's got to cave in on that.
Yeah.
I don't know, when are people just eventually going to get tired of playing 5e or
Right.
But anyway, I don't know that I have. I guess I could show. I do have some copies of the book here.
Yeah.
When I show you this, it'll be reversed.
Yeah. I think when I put it up and recording it, it'll be yes. It looks really cool. And what I'll do is like because I think we have about 30 seconds left before the timer cuts off. So yeah, it looks really cool. So and I will include some images and everything in the presentation too. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on, and really looking forward to the Kickstarter. I have no doubt it's going to go through because you're so close as it is now. And just once again, thanks for coming on, and I look forward to chatting with you some other time. So we'll see maybe when the Kickstarter's over. If you're doing any play tests, I want to try to jump in on one. So just let me know if you have any spots open in your game, and I'd certainly like to give it a try.
Sure. All right.
All right. So thanks a lot, and although perfect timing, the wife is just calling me now, so perfect timing. Yeah.
Of course, I'm recording this on my phone, and I can see my wife actually texted me just now too. So.
Yeah, it's that time. So all right, thanks a lot for coming on in, Chris. So and look forward to chatting with you. Like I said, as soon as the Kickstarter's over, and I'll chat with you, and like I said, hopefully we can get a game going.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yep, not a problem. All right, I'm just going to end here. Okay, so there you have the interview, and it was a really a great pleasure in meeting Christopher, and just talking about his game. As I said, multiple times during the interview, it was a project that I backed myself, which is something that it's something that I only do on this channel is that I only present games out to you that I have actually backed myself. Once again, I mean it was a lot of fun, and what I will do at this time is show you where the Kickstarter is currently at. And for some reason it didn't actually stay there. That's very weird, but it will take me 2 seconds to jump back into and see. Oh, I don't have internet connection, so that's the problem. That's why it kicked out. All right, so I currently don't have internet connection, so I won't be able to go back to that and show that to you. But as soon as I figure out that hiccup, then just be on the lookout for the game. It is still on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter is running for I believe another 20 plus days. So I know it has hit its threshold. So it is fully funded, and now at this point, hopefully it starts hitting some of those stretch goals. And once again, thanks for joining. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments about the interview or about the game, I will make sure that Christopher knows to take a look at the video when it does get put up, and perhaps he'll pop in and answer any of your questions there as well. So again, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. Perhaps it'll be if I run a game of Ankur. All right, have a great one.